On a freezing night in Racine, Wisconsin, Saturday, January 31st, 2004, a chilling 911 call pierced the silence. "Can I help you? Your husband is trying to kill me." A desperate voice trembled through the line, revealing a woman trapped inside a garbage can filled with snow. In that moment, Terry Gendusa whispered the horrifying truth. Her ex-husband was after her life. As she lay imprisoned in his truck, the biting cold of the snow enveloped her, and terror gripped her heart, leaving her uncertain of her fate. This woman, Terry Gendusa, born in the mid-1960s in Wisconsin, was fighting for her very survival. Terry had experienced a happy childhood, growing up in a stable family. She shared a close bond with her 3 siblings, vibrant and full of life. After high school, she pursued higher education at the University of Wisconsin-Parkside. It was here, through mutual friends, that she first crossed paths with David Larson in 1983. They enjoyed each other's company amidst friends at local pubs, yet their relationship remained strictly platonic. It wasn't until 1995, 12 years later, that Terry and David reconnected. At this point, Terry had just exited a long-term relationship, while David had recently left the Marine Corps. Both were in search of something meaningful, having shared a history together. It seemed like a perfect match. Their shared past and readiness to settle down created an illusion of compatibility. However, Terry would later confess that she had rushed into the relationship, driven by the ticking of her biological clock, while ignoring glaring red flags. David's violent temper and evident disdain for women were traits she chose to overlook. Although his anger made her uncomfortable, it was initially directed at waitstaff, clerks, and cashiers, never at her. Yet, as time passed, the facade began to crack. Terry was embarrassed by his behavior, but could never have predicted that she would one day become the target of his rage. Shortly after their marriage in April 1996, everything changed. Just 4 days into their honeymoon in Hawaii, David struck Terry for the first time. His justification? He disapproved of her outfit. When she refused to change, David hit her, asserting that now that they were married, she was obliged to comply with his demands. He even went as far as to declare that she was bought and paid for. After their return home, brief moments of calm were interspersed with the storm of David's volatile behavior. With someone like David, the good times were mere illusions, always followed by darkness. David believed their marriage was a contract, one in which Terry was bound to follow every rule he set. To him, any failure to comply warranted punishment, often meted out through extreme violence. During the course of their tumultuous marriage, Terry attempted to leave David 5 times. Each time, he would feign remorse, promising to seek counseling or attend anger management classes. Yet once the storm calmed, he would abandon those promises, keeping her ensnared in a cycle of violence. It is crucial not to judge Terry for her choices. Victims of domestic violence often navigate complex and dangerous circumstances, and Terry was no exception. David exerted control over every aspect of her life. He forced her to quit her job, severed her ties with friends, and stripped her of any financial independence. He took possession of her car, which was registered in her name, and limited her access to financial information. Terry was left with a mere $25 each week for her expenses. In a relentless struggle, Terry Gendusa found herself trapped under the oppressive weight of her husband's control. She meticulously balanced every aspect of her life, presenting receipts to authorities as proof of her compliance. Yet despair seeped into her soul as she realized there was no escape from David Larson's suffocating grip. With a heavy heart, she surrendered to his demands. She moved like a marionette, following each of his orders, desperate to fulfill his expectations. Persistent manipulation chipped away at her self-esteem, making her feel responsible for circumstances that were not her fault. In a moment of clarity, Terry recognized that no matter how diligently she tried to be the perfect wife, David would always find fault. He wielded her weaknesses like weapons, lashing out with each frustration he faced. With a heavy heart, Terry arrived at a painful conclusion. She realized that her efforts were futile. David would always discover something to criticize. It was a stark revelation that came too late. By the time she began to craft a plan for escape, she discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy, yet dread lingered in her mind. She understood that the toxic environment was not one in which to raise a child. Still, she clung to a frail hope that motherhood could soften David's hardened heart. During her pregnancy, David's demeanor shifted slightly. He treated Terry with a semblance of kindness. But as soon as their daughter Amanda entered the world in 1997, the facade crumbled. 2 years later, their second daughter, Holly, was born, yet the happiness of fatherhood failed to transform David. The darkness that engulfed their home persisted. The breaking point arrived in late 1999 during a vicious argument. Accounts of that night vary, but one fact remained. David crossed an unforgivable line. Whether he screamed at Amanda or shoved Terry while she cradled Holly, the impact was the same. In that moment, Terry understood she could no longer expose her children to such turmoil. With a resolve forged in desperation, she made the decision to leave for good. Gathering her belongings and her daughters, Terry sought refuge in a women's shelter, initiating divorce proceedings against David. But he was not ready to relinquish control. He stalled the legal process, refusing to cooperate or provide necessary documentation. In a cruel twist, he smeared Terry's name, fighting to maintain his grip on their lives. His contempt for the court only backfired, leading to further legal repercussions. One undeniable truth emerged. David Larson had crossed a line by involving their children in the turmoil of their marriage. Recognizing the toxic environment that threatened to shape her daughters' lives, Terry Gendusa made the difficult decision to leave for good. In a determined effort to protect her family, she packed what she could, taking her daughters with her to a women's shelter while simultaneously filing for divorce. But David Larson was not about to let Terry leave without a fight. He stalled the divorce proceedings, refusing to provide the necessary documents, and resorted to defaming Terry's character. His contempt for the court was palpable as he dragged his feet through the legal process, thinking he could manipulate the situation in his favor. His strategy of bad-mouthing Terry, hurling insults at judges and disregarding his own lawyer, ultimately backfired. Finally, on January 31, 2001, the court granted Terry the divorce she so desperately sought, severing her ties with David after 3 long and harrowing years. Yet even after the divorce was finalized, David remained a presence in Terry's life. Despite her harrowing accounts of their traumatic marriage, a judge awarded joint custody of their daughters, forcing Terry to continue facing the man who had once terrorized her during court-ordered custody exchanges. David insisted that these exchanges occur at his home, adamantly refusing to meet in public, despite Terry's desperate pleas for a safer environment. How he managed to dictate these terms was a mystery, but it forced Terry to confront the haunting memories of her past regularly. This relentless reminder of her nightmare left her firmly convinced that she would never date or marry again. Her focus was solely on herself and her daughters. However, as fate often has it, love finds you when you least expect it. Just before her divorce was finalized, Terry joined the Bel Canto Community Chorus, where she met Nick Nicolai. Immediately drawn to Terry, Nick chose to respect her space during her tumultuous divorce. As time passed, their friendship blossomed into a tender romance. Nick was kind, respectful, and deeply empathetic to everything Terry had endured. He embraced her daughters wholeheartedly, treating them as if they were his own, which only deepened their bond. By May 2001, Terry and Nick officially began dating, and after 2.5 years of nurturing their relationship, they sealed their love in marriage in October 2003. For the first time, Terry felt as though she had the stable and loving family she had always yearned for. By May 2001, Terry Gendusa and Nick Nicolai embarked on a new chapter, officially beginning their romantic relationship. After 2.5 years of shared dreams and budding love, they exchanged vows in a heartfelt ceremony in October 2003. In that moment, Terry felt a profound sense of belonging, finally believing she had found the stable and nurturing family she had always longed for. Terry Gendusa had always envisioned a brighter future, yet her ex-husband, David Larson, harbored a different sentiment. Despite their divorce being finalized, David clung to the belief that they were still bound in the eyes of God. He felt deeply betrayed by Terry, convinced that her decision to remarry was a betrayal of both him and divine will. This feeling of betrayal ignited a fury within David. He blamed Terry for tearing their family apart and vowed to make her pay for her perceived transgressions. On the very day they left the courthouse after the divorce was granted, he ominously warned her that one day she would regret her decision to separate from him. Although Terry was already gripped by fear of her ex-husband, she believed she had endured the worst of his wrath. Little did she know, the nightmare was far from over. David had sinister plans waiting in the shadows. All Terry yearned for was to escape the life she had known and to forge a new path. And she was indeed moving forward. Terry had found a new husband, a kind-hearted man who supported her as she rebuilt her career. Just the day before, on January 30th, 2004, she and her new husband, Nick Nicolai, received the joyous news that they were expecting a child. The couple was elated, and so were Terry's daughters, Holly and Amanda, who had been eagerly anticipating the arrival of a new sibling. Terry and Nick could hardly wait to share the wonderful news with the girls the following day, looking forward to a celebration filled with love. Saturday, January 31st, 2004, marked the third anniversary of Terry and David's finalized divorce. It was an unforgivingly cold day in Wisconsin, with biting temperatures, fierce winds, and a blanket of snow covering the ground. Witnesses described the weather as so frigid that it made even breathing a challenge. Yet the brutal cold was the least of Terry's worries. Her mind was consumed with thoughts of her daughters and the excitement of sharing the news of their new sibling. As she prepared to pick them up from David's house, Nick offered to accompany her. However, Terry declined his offer, knowing that his presence could escalate tensions with David. She was determined to avoid any unnecessary confrontations. On her drive to his house, she called David to inform him of her arrival time. Upon her arrival around 10 a.m., David informed her that the girls weren't ready yet. Frustrated but unwilling to engage in an argument, she urged him to hurry, opting to wait outside in the biting cold for nearly 20 minutes. Terry paced the driveway, desperately trying to keep warm. At last, David opened the door, but her daughters were nowhere to be seen. Instead, he stepped outside, claiming that the girls were hiding and wanted her to come inside to find them. A wave of unease washed over Terry. David had not allowed her into his house since their separation, so his sudden invitation felt suspicious. Nevertheless, the biting cold and her desire to see her daughters outweighed her apprehensions. She brushed off her doubts and stepped inside. As she playfully called out for her daughters, a sense of dread washed over her. Panic set in as her worst fears materialized the instant she felt a sharp blow to her head. In that horrifying moment, she realized that David had attacked her with a baseball bat. As she collapsed to the floor, David continued his assault, striking her repeatedly while screaming, "You always said I was abusing you. Now you can see what abuse really is." He unleashed a torrent of blows, hitting her over 20 times until darkness enveloped her consciousness. When Terry finally regained consciousness, she found herself bound in duct tape, immobilized from head to toe, a chilling testament to the nightmare that had just unfolded. Panic engulfed Terry as she recognized the sinister intentions lurking in David Larson's mind. Desperation fueled her attempts to negotiate, pleading with him to abandon their custody battle and the child support demands. Yet, her cries fell on deaf ears as David fixated on a nightmarish plan that spiraled further into darkness. In a disturbing turn, while David bound her ankles with tape, Terry's pants slipped down. He became irrationally convinced that this was a deliberate act on her part to humiliate him. This unfounded belief only deepened his deranged mindset, revealing the depths of his delusion. Once he secured her, David callously discarded her bruised and bleeding body into a trash can. He packed it with snow, loading it into the back of his truck. On one of Wisconsin's coldest days, he left her half-naked, beaten, and buried under a chilling layer of snow. Despite the horrific circumstances, Terry clung to a flicker of hope. In his frenzy, David had overlooked a critical detail. Her cell phone remained tucked in her jacket pocket, even as he silenced her screams with duct tape covering her face. Though her face was swollen to the point of immobility, Terry fought against the tape binding her wrists. With a desperate determination, she managed to wriggle her phone free and dial 911, aware that speaking clearly would be nearly impossible. Over and over, she relayed David's address to the operator, her voice a whisper of urgency. Her relentless efforts proved fruitful, as the police and rescue teams were dispatched to her location. However, by the time they arrived, David had already loaded their daughters, Holly and Amanda, into his truck and fled the scene, evading capture as the sirens blared in the distance. Unbeknownst to the officers, they drove right past David's truck, with Terry still bound and concealed in the back. Her vehicle was hitched to his, and she could hear the wailing sirens fade away, a crushing wave of defeat washing over her as hope slipped through her fingers. It seemed they had missed their one chance to save her life. When the officers reached David's home, they believed someone inside was in distress. With no response at the door, they forced their way in, only to discover the house eerily empty. Meanwhile, neighbors began to gather, and their questions ignited a spark of understanding for the police. They quickly learned of the troubled history between David and Terry. It became evident that they were entangled in a situation far more sinister than what they had initially perceived. However, the officers remained oblivious to the full extent of the horrors that had unfolded. In the meantime, Terry drifted in and out of consciousness, her life hanging in the balance. Summoning her strength, she managed to call her husband, Nick, struggling against the duct tape that concealed her face. With horror, Nick listened as she recounted the nightmare she was enduring. Understanding the urgency, he knew he had to act quickly and alert the police. They ended their call and dialed 911 once again. Nick reached the same Racine County dispatch center that had received Terry's initial call, and in that moment, the pieces of the grim puzzle began to align for the authorities at David's residence. As the police began to grasp the full scope of the situation, Terry's second call proved less effective. By then, David had crossed into Milwaukee County, and the new dispatcher was unaware of the peril Terry faced. Listening to the call, it became evident that the urgency of the situation was not fully comprehended by the dispatcher. While it's understandable that 911 dispatchers must emotionally detach to cope with the pressures of their role, in this instance, that detachment led to a tragic oversight. The unfortunate reality was that this emotional disconnection transformed into a blatant disregard for Terry's safety, with devastating consequences looming on the horizon. The tension surrounding Terry Gendusa's plight escalated dramatically during her second 911 call. Many were left stunned and angered as the operator, seemingly dismissive, questioned the authenticity of her desperate plea. It was a response that belied the gravity of the situation unfolding. "Can I help you?" the operator asked, her tone dripping with skepticism. Terry, fighting for her life, responded urgently, "Your husband is trying to kill me." The operator retorted incredulously, "Your husband is trying to kill you? Does he have any hands up or what?" In a frantic whisper, Terry uttered, "Masking tape, masking tape." As the operator continued, "How are you holding the phone? Do you want to talk to me or do you just want to take a deep breath?" It became painfully clear to anyone listening that Terry was in grave danger. Yet instead of receiving the compassion she desperately needed, her words were met with disbelief and dismissal. Many accounts of this case gloss over Terry's 911 call, but it stands as a stark reminder of the critical failure in what should have been a lifeline for her amidst the horror she was enduring. Despite the odds stacked against her, Terry continued to fight for her life. Regaining consciousness, she realized they were still moving. In a desperate bid for survival, she thrust her hand out of the garbage can, waving it frantically to catch the attention of any passing driver. Tragically, it was her husband, David Larson, who noticed her desperate signal. Infuriated by her attempt to escape, he pulled over and struck her again with the bat. He threatened to shoot her if she dared to try anything else. As if the situation couldn't worsen, her cell phone rang. David seized her only connection to the outside world, leaving her completely isolated. Faced with the grim reality of her circumstances, Terry made a harrowing decision. She would play dead. As David unloaded the trash can from the truck, she lay still, hoping to convince him that she was no longer a threat. His intent was chilling, to dispose of her in a storage locker. He wheeled the trash can into the unit, duct-taped it shut, and pushed it into a corner. To ensure her complete entrapment, he piled boxes on top of it, sealing off her escape. With a final slam of the metal roll-up door, he left, believing he had left her for dead. Meanwhile, the police were intensifying their efforts at David's house. Time was of the essence, and they knew they had to act swiftly. With scant information to guide them, they issued Amber Alerts for their daughters, Holly and Amanda, and broadcasted all-points bulletins for both David and Terry's vehicles. They attempted to ping their cell phones and conducted a thorough search of David's home, a daunting task due to the overwhelming hoarding conditions. The house was a chaotic maze filled with old food, dirty dishes, and laundry strewn across the floor. Navigating through the narrow walkways proved difficult. The question lingered in the air. Would the police be able to gather sufficient information in time to save Terry, or had they already missed their window of opportunity? As they combed through David's cluttered home, the police stumbled upon a chilling discovery. Terry's pants, covered in duct tape and blood, lay discarded, alongside a massive bloodstain on the carpet. The size of the stain suggested that whoever it belonged to, presumably Terry, was in critical condition. The urgency of the situation was palpable. Time was slipping away, and without locating her soon, the police feared the worst. Despite their relentless pursuit of promising leads, every avenue seemed to lead to dead ends. By nightfall, the police expanded their search to include every location David had ever frequented, hoping for a breakthrough. As fate would have it, they finally spotted David heading to work, a glimmer of hope in an otherwise darkening scenario. As they casually drove, seemingly unburdened by the weight of their actions, the officers initiated a traffic stop. They braced for a confrontation with a man known for his volatility. However, upon approaching the vehicle, they were taken aback to find David Larson remarkably calm and collected, and, most importantly, alone. Terry Gendusa and her daughters were nowhere in sight. David played the part of the bewildered ex-husband flawlessly, feigning ignorance about the urgency of the officer's presence. The police, recognizing the charade, opted to engage him in conversation. Adopting a non-confrontational demeanor, they extended an invitation to the station, suggesting there were a few questions to clarify some confusion. Surprisingly, David agreed without hesitation. Once in the interview room, it became evident that he felt untouchable. His arrogance hung heavily in the air. Within moments, he assured the police that Holly and Amanda were safe at his girlfriend's house. He claimed he had dropped them off because Terry had failed to pick them up that morning. Then, David launched into a lengthy diatribe, vilifying Terry as the true antagonist in their tumultuous saga. He raged about the torment she had subjected him to over the years, blissfully unaware of the gravity of his circumstances. The officers let him speak, knowing that sometimes the truth emerges from the lies that ensnare the liar. As David continued to weave his tale of innocence, inconsistencies began to surface, laying the groundwork for his inevitable downfall. He sat back, recounting a day that he painted as the perfect depiction of a devoted father, one who had prepared breakfast for his daughters and patiently awaited Terry's arrival. According to him, he had waited until 11:30 a.m. before finally conceding defeat and taking the girls to his girlfriend's house. His confidence in the narrative was alarming, yet that singular detail would unravel his entire story. Terry's first 911 call had been made at 10:57 a.m. The police had reached David's home by 11:03 a.m., a staggering 27 minutes before the time he claimed to have departed. And when they arrived, David was nowhere to be found. This glaring contradiction left a conspicuous hole in his alibi. Once they caught him in this lie, the police confronted him with an overwhelming array of evidence. The blood discovered in his home, Terry's pants, the recorded 911 calls. They bombarded him with the facts, and as they did, they noted something shocking. David sat there, calmly fielding their questions while wearing pants stained with Terry's blood, oblivious to the damning evidence. As the realization dawned on him, David scrambled, desperately attempting to pivot his story. He concocted a new narrative on the spot, claiming that while he packed his daughter's school bags that morning, Terry had somehow infiltrated his home. He alleged that she had dropped her pants and attacked him with a hammer, forcing him to defend himself with a baseball bat. In a moment of chaos, he claimed to have blacked out, leaving him utterly clueless about what transpired next or where Terry might be. The detectives, however, were not swayed. They reminded David that the outside temperatures were frigid, and if Terry was still alive, every second counted. They appealed to whatever humanity might linger within him, hoping to ignite a flicker of remorse. In a bewildering twist, David claimed that Terry had dropped her pants and attacked him with a hammer. He insisted that he had only acted in self-defense when he felt compelled to immobilize her with a baseball bat. From that moment onward, he asserted that he blacked out, leaving him in the dark about what transpired next, or where Terry might be. The detectives, however, were not convinced by his story. They reminded David that the bitter cold outside posed a serious threat to Terry's survival, and if she was indeed still alive, time was of the essence. They pushed him to tap into any remaining shred of humanity he might possess as the clock continued to tick ominously. As the detectives implored him to think of his daughters, David Larson simply smiled, yawned, and nonchalantly requested a break. In that moment, he conveyed a chilling message. No matter what happened, He was resolute in ensuring that Terry Gendusa would be dead by the time she was discovered. The scene was a shocking manifestation of cold-heartedness. Caught red-handed, quite literally, David exhibited no regard for Terry's life. His animosity ran so deep that he seemed willing to sacrifice everything, including his own freedom. The detectives quickly recognized they were dealing with a man whose desire for vengeance eclipsed any instinct for self-preservation. They pondered, could they uncover Terry in time to save her? Despite David's obstinate silence, investigators grappled with the weight of his twisted resolve. During the interrogation, he asked for a break, a request that, by legal protocol, had to be honored to avoid any claims of coercion. While the detectives complied, this break inadvertently became an advantage for them. As they combed through David's personal belongings, they stumbled upon a significant clue hidden within the chaos of his wallet. Among the jumble of business cards and receipts lay a business card for a storage facility located in Wheeling, Illinois, nearly 60 miles from David's home in Wisconsin. This discovery felt out of place and raised suspicions, for it was uncommon for someone to store belongings so far from home. Time was of the essence, and driven by desperation, the investigators pursued this lead. They contacted the storage facility and learned that David had indeed rented a unit there. To their alarm, he had accessed it mere hours after Terry's disappearance. This revelation heightened their suspicions, prompting a deeper investigation. They instructed the facility attendant to check the storage unit for any unusual findings. After a tense wait, the attendant relayed that he heard sounds suggesting someone might be inside. In that critical moment, investigators ordered the attendant to contact local law enforcement, and the Racine County Police sped toward Wheeling. With the clock ticking, the Wheeling police arrived at the facility armed with a pry bar, ready to force entry into David's storage unit. The urgency was palpable. Upon entering the unit, their initial optimism quickly waned as they surveyed a scene filled only with boxes, shelves, and a trash can. It was the trash can that drew their attention, an ominous presence in an otherwise mundane space. Duct-taped shut, it ignited a grim realization. If Terry was indeed in the storage unit, she would likely be confined within this very container. The officers proceeded with extreme caution, carefully removing the tape and lifting the lid. Inside, they found Terry bound with duct tape, bloodied, and barely clinging to life. She lay curled in a fetal position, frostbitten and suffering from severe hypothermia, her body temperature plummeting to a dangerously low 86 degrees. Despite her harrowing condition, having endured 27 hours in such horrific circumstances, Terry's survival was nothing short of miraculous. She had lost a significant volume of blood and was afflicted with severe frostbite. Physically and mentally, she was in a critical state. Yet, unbeknownst to the officers at that moment, the full extent of her internal injuries remained hidden. Her blood pressure and respiratory rate were alarmingly low, and her kidneys were beginning to fail. On February 1, 2004, despite the dire circumstances surrounding her, Terry Gendusa was rushed to the hospital. Her medical team faced a daunting uncertainty regarding her survival. Yet, defying the odds, Terry embarked on a slow but remarkable recovery that spanned nearly 2 months. Throughout her harrowing ordeal, she lost all 10 toes to frostbite and tragically suffered the loss of her and Nick Nikolai's unborn child. Yet, her survival shone as a testament to her extraordinary strength and resilience. Meanwhile, David Larson faced the full weight of justice as he was tried and convicted on multiple charges, including attempted murder. His convictions extended to kidnapping, obstructing child custody, and interstate domestic violence. Today, he serves a life sentence. In 2010, he made a desperate attempt to appeal his conviction, invoking a claim of double jeopardy, but the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals swiftly rejected his argument. In a brazen move, it was discovered that David Larson had concocted an elaborate escape plan from prison involving a fabricated medical emergency. However, his scheme was thwarted. In addition to his prison sentence, the state of Wisconsin mandated that he pay $3.4 million in restitution to Terry, along with an additional $300,000 to Nick. David Larson's attempts to evade this financial responsibility through bankruptcy were denied, as the court deemed his debts a direct result of his malicious actions. Despite his incarceration, he continued to make legal efforts to insert himself into Terry's life. He inundated the court with requests for visitation with his daughters, Amanda and Holly, as well as for reductions in child support payments. Each request was met with consistent denial. Now, as Amanda and Holly have both entered their 20s, David's ties to Terry have been irrevocably severed. In the aftermath of the trauma inflicted upon her, Terry has emerged with remarkable strength and a spirit of forgiveness. She perceives David Larson as the true victim of his own actions, embodying a profound glass-half-full mindset. Following her recovery, she and Nick welcomed a son into their family. Today, Terry Gendusa stands as a beacon of hope and resilience. As a public speaker, she advocates for victims' rights and educates others on escaping abusive relationships. Her influence has been pivotal in drafting important legislation, such as the Wisconsin SAFE Act and Marsy's Law. Additionally, she collaborates with Generations Against Bullying. Terry has truly transformed her experiences into a powerful force for change and support for victims everywhere.